Good afternoon. I'm Congressman Elijah Cummings, and I'm honored to welcome you here to Baltimore. Let me start by asking everyone to join me in giving a warm Baltimore welcome to Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you. So nice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I want you to give that same kind of applause to my colleague, the distinguished Congressman John Sarbanes. Senator Warren and I teamed up at the beginning of this year to launch the Middle Class Prosperity Project. Our goal is to focus attention on issues that matter most, both to middle-class families and to those who aspire to it. Today's forum will be our fifth so far. In February, we focused on wages for millions of workers across the country, wages that are stagnant even though worker productivity has never been higher. In March, we focused on seniors and how financial advisors sometimes give bad advice on their retirement savings because they have conflicts of interest. And last month, we focused on the increasingly huge financial burden families take on in order to send their kids to college. I'm sure there are some who may be familiar with that in this room. We've made clear from the beginning of this project that we want to help not only families already in the middle class, but also those who are trying to break out of the cycle of poverty, work hard and save, educate their children, and get into the middle class so they can achieve the all-American dream. That is why we are here today. Today's forum is being held just blocks from where Freddie Gray was arrested, in a neighborhood known as Sandtown, Winchester. We also are just a few blocks away from my own neighborhood, where I've lived for 33 years. Freddie Gray's death has drawn the nation's eye to Baltimore. Of course, his death has brought renewed attention to the challenges we face with police community relations and criminal justice reform. But it has also highlighted the deep and systemic economic challenges that Mr. Gray faced during his lifetime and that many other residents of the city and cities around this nation face every single day. My hope is that the eyes of the nation do not turn away before they see the full scope of these challenges and the urgent need to address them. 2 weeks ago, I spoke at Freddie Gray's funeral, and I asked whether anybody recognized this young man when he was alive. I'm here today to urge the American people and my colleagues in Washington to see our communities and to hear about their challenges, because their struggles are our struggles. They are the same as those faced by families in Massachusetts, South Carolina, Missouri, and all over our great country. Today, we will focus on families that are unbanked, meaning they do not have a bank account. We will also focus on the underbanked families that have at least one bank account, but also use alternative financial service providers such as liquor stores and pawn shops. I'd like to refer to two maps of Baltimore. They were compiled by the National Community Reinvestment Coalition based on data collected by the FDIC and the U.S. Department of the Treasury. The first map shows all of Baltimore. The red marks are bank branches and the green marks are alternative financial service providers. You can see many more banks clustered in the high-income areas, while the low and moderate income areas have fewer banks. The second map shows a close-up of Sandtown, where Freddie Gray lived, and you can really see the disparity there. There are only 3 bank branches in this entire area, but there are more than 18 alternative providers. According to the FDIC, in 2013, 1 of every 13 households in the United States was unbanked, and 1 in 5 households was underbanked. In Baltimore's Houston metro area, these numbers were worse. In 2013, more than 5% of households were unbanked, and more than 25% were underbanked. So what does this mean? Many alternative providers offer financial services on fair terms, but unfortunately, others employ predatory and abusive terms that lock families into long-term cycles of high-interest debt they simply cannot escape. I'm not suggesting that major banks move into these neighborhoods overnight. My point is that the decreasing number of banks in these areas and the increasing number of families being preyed upon by unscrupulous servicers is a symptom of a much larger challenge. We should be helping low-income families get into the middle class, and we should be helping middle-class families continue to prosper. We can do that by investing in these families and communities. And so we need to support early education programs like Head Start, health programs for prenatal care, lead paint abatement, early childhood development, community college programs, and employment training programs. We need to invest in infrastructure improvements that will help our communities, help our businesses, and help our workers. These steps, in turn, will help all of us because they drive the engine of our nation's economy. What we should not do is what Washington has been doing for the past several years, slashing funding for these critical programs, imposing harmful sequestration cuts, and shutting down the government, all while giving lucrative tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans and corporations. Rather than trying to roll back consumer protections and weaken the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, we must ensure that it has authority to enforce the fair regulations and that we protect all consumers from abusive financial service providers. With that, I'd like to thank Congressman Sarbanes for joining us and for his great leadership in our Maryland delegation and throughout our state. Let me also thank President Jay Perman, as well as Dean Donald Tobin and Rachel Tabakin from the University of Maryland for hosting us here today. It's an honor to be here today at my alma mater, where I graduated from law school many years ago. But it's certainly good to be back. And now it is my honor and my privilege to introduce again to you my friend, someone who I've worked with for now it's going on several years. Yep. Distinguished Senator from the great state of Massachusetts, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman. Do I turn this on? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to join you in your hometown. I know that these are difficult times for Baltimore, and you have taken an important role in leading this city. It is an honor to be here with you. Can we all give the Congressman a very warm round of applause? Thank you. And thank you, Congressman Sarbanes, for being with us today. Really appreciate it. You know, Congressman Cummings and I know that the recent events in Baltimore are not the result of a single tragedy. These events are also about millions of people, young and old, here and across the country, who find themselves struggling to make it in a system that is increasingly rigged against them. This struggle to build a financial future is especially difficult for communities of color. In 2013, median wealth for white families was $142,000. That was the family right in the middle, not averages, the median. Median wealth for African American families, right in the middle, was $11,000. Think about that difference, $142,000 and $11,000. This startling difference is not just the short-term impact of economic blows, but the impact of blows that reach across the generations, when many white families accumulated just a little more and just a little more, a better deal on a mortgage, in a better neighborhood, a college education, access to credit to start a small business, and everyone who didn't have access to that was left behind. It has to stop. Look at housing. After decades of being ripped off, first through restrictive deed covenants, then through redlining, then through deceptive land contracts, African Americans were left with less and less wealth. Then along came Wall Street, ready to target African American neighborhoods for the worst of the subprime mortgages. And then, when the crisis hit, data show that black families got hit harder again. In 2012, just one example, Wells Fargo paid the Justice Department $175 million to avoid prosecution for charging higher fees and rates to more than 30,000 minority borrowers than they charged white borrowers with exactly the same risks, and for steering over 4,000 minority borrowers into costlier subprime mortgages when white borrowers received safer, cheaper loans. The Department of Justice called it a racial surtax, and they were right. Another way that wealth has been stripped out of our communities of color is through predatory practices that target those who already live on the margins of our mainstream financial system. It's a challenge faced by families throughout this country, and it's our focus today. Many Americans use traditional banks and credit unions to cash checks, to pay their bills, and to borrow money. But for millions more, traditional banking is closed off. For some, a $100 minimum balance to open a checking account isn't easy. For others, access gets harder as many big banks pull branches out of poorer neighborhoods and relocate in richer neighborhoods. Millions of families turn to check cashers, payday lenders, and title loan outfits, and the costs can be crushing. The average family that relies on alternative financial services, now listen to this, spends an average of $2,412 per year. That is about 10% of their income on just fees, interest, and trying to keep it all going in financial services. It is about the same amount that the average American family spends on food, 10% of their income, 10% on financial services from the families that can afford it the least, 10% sucked right out of their pockets because they can't find a way into traditional banking services. For those who get caught up with payday loans, the costs can spiral out of control. A single loan can quickly become a cycle of debt after debt, fee after fee after fee. Title loans can be just as bad, but they add the extra pain of losing the car and often the only way someone can get to work. That's not a business model. That's a trap designed to ensnare families that can't build enough financial cushion to weather the ups and downs. And it is a trap that makes sure that those families never will build the cushion they need. What's happening to the American security of African American families reflects what's happening to the middle class families all across this country, only worse. Families feel it in their bones. They're looking for jobs, they're working to buy homes, they're trying to build some economic security. They are working harder than ever, but they are falling behind. Today, we have panelists with us who will talk about their experience with these issues. And I especially want to hear more about what the federal government can do, whether it's taking a closer look at the Community Reinvestment Act, which was designed to encourage banks to invest in these communities, or the idea that the post office could expand its financial services offerings, just as it did many, many decades ago. This is about choices, and it is time for our country to make new choices. Choices that will give all of our families a fighting chance to build a future for their kids and their grandkids. It is time to act now because our families can't wait any longer. Thank you again, Congressman Cummings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congressman Sarbanes.
Thank you, Congressman Cummings. I'll be very brief because we have a terrific panel we want to get to. Senator Warren, thank you for coming to Baltimore. Congressman Cummings, thank you for never leaving Baltimore. And last week, last week, like a medic who runs in the direction of people who are in then it's about saving the money, and then it's about being able to use the money that you've saved. You know, getting the money is about having a good job that pays well enough that you can then save. But then in order to save, you have to have access to the right kinds of banking services. Once you have that money saved, the question is, can you use the money? And too many people, when they take their small savings and they turn around and they want to build upon it and use that to advance themselves, those financial products are not there, or they're preyed upon by unscrupulous lenders and other actors out there in the field. So we're going to hear today about the progress that can be made in terms of people being able to save and being able to use the money that they save. And then just a couple of last observations. In many respects, I think, at a time when we want to build one community, Congressman Cummings and I were there in front of the CVS the other day when the mayor announced the One Baltimore initiative. Everything you need to know is embodied in that name. But at a time when we're trying to build one Baltimore and trying to build one America, the fact of the matter is that these impediments in terms of people being able to bank, being able to save, being able to use their money is actually something structural that is pulling us apart. It's keeping us apart. It's keeping communities apart that really do want to be part of one America or one Baltimore. And that's why we have to solve those problems. And finally, there are probably a lot of people out there in the country who think that the issues that came to light over the last couple of weeks here in Baltimore in terms of the huge economic challenges facing certain communities are issues that they can escape. That doesn't really affect them. But at the end of the day, if we don't build strong communities everywhere, we're going to undermine the strength of our country overall. And so we can't escape this as a society. We have to address these structural problems. And we have a terrific panel today, and we have great leadership from people like Senator Warren and Congressman Cummings. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. I'd like to now introduce our panel. Robin McKinney is the director and co-founder of the Maryland Cash Campaign, a nonprofit that promotes financial security for working families through tax-free tax preparation, financial education classes for low-income Marylanders. Ms. McKinney holds a Master's of Social Work degree from the University of Maryland at Baltimore, where she is an adjunct professor. She is on the board of the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, the Rural Maryland Foundation, and the Corporation for Enterprise Development. Jeanette A. Richardson is the executive director of Bel Air Edison Neighborhoods, Inc., which is a healthy neighborhoods and Baltimore Main Street partner organization and a HUD-certified comprehensive housing counseling agency. Ms. Richardson is a graduate of our own Morgan State University and serves as the president of the board of Alphia Baltimore, Inc., a Baltimore City public charter school organization, and on the steering committee of the Baltimore Home Ownership Preservation Coalition. She is a 2010 Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Fellow.
And I get to introduce Rachel Schneider. She is a senior vice president at the Center for Financial Services Innovation. This is a network of more than 60 financial institutions and nonprofits that are working together to understand America's financially underserved and design quality financial products. Ms. Schneider, who holds both a JD and an MBA, is the principal investigator on the U.S. Financial Diaries research study, which collects detailed data on the savings, the spending, the borrowing, and the planning practices of more than 200 households. Ms. Schneider began her career as an investment banker at Merrill Lynch. Welcome today, Ms. Schneider.
And finally, Maynard Hurd is the Vice President of Lending at Securities Plus Federal Credit Union. Founded in 1938, Security Plus is one of the largest credit unions in the state of Maryland and provides financial services to meet the needs of more than 35,000 members with $350 million in assets. Security Plus members include anyone who lives, works, or worships or attends school in the city of Baltimore. Mr. Hurd has worked for over 15 years in the not-for-profit credit union industry and is a graduate of Frostburg State University. We will now hear from Ms. McKinney, and welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Senator Warren and Congressman Cummings, for your unwavering commitment to consumers and for putting on this great event. And thank you also, Congressman Sarbanes, for your support and also supporting our local partner here, the Baltimore Cash Campaign. Maryland Cash seeks to improve the financial security of working families. Cash stands for creating assets, savings, and hope. And I have to say, your leadership brings us a lot of hope. Our partners prepare free tax returns for 18,000 households, bringing back $30 million in refunds each and every year. About half of those households are here in Baltimore City. Our partners also prepare financial education coaching to over 6,000 people across the state. I want to tell you a story about Ms. Thompson. She works for a large hospital very close to here. She makes a good salary, over $50,000 a year, and when the economic downturn happened, she found herself, her husband couldn't find work, and she was dealing with costs with her aging parents. She got involved with a payday loan. I actually have one of her loan documents here, and she borrowed $500, and it was going to cost her $3,000 to pay back that $500. One loan quickly led to 8, and before she knew it, she was $5,000 in debt. She came to us anxious, concerned, because as soon as her paycheck hit her bank account, all of the payday loan companies were taking her entire paycheck, so she had nothing left to pay any of her other bills. She was frantic. She didn't know what she was going to do. Luckily, though, due to the very strong payday loan laws we have here in Maryland, as well as the oversight capacity of the Commissioner on Financial Regulation, we determined 7 of those 8 loans were illegal. And so she was advised to close her bank account, which was actually the only way that we could stop the ACH payment from happening. And while she was relieved not to have this immediate debt that she had to deal with, she was worried about what was going to be the impact on her credit score, and she knew that the debt collection calls were ready to happen. I think the story of Ms. Thompson is all too common for the middle class who are just one emergency away from desperation. And we know that desperation is fertile ground for exploitation. Many people here in Baltimore would tell you that they are middle class. Their income might not reflect this, but they aspire to the tenets of the middle class: a good job with benefits, a stable home, good schools for their kids, living in a safe neighborhoods. For too many of these individuals and families, the cost is too high for them to actually achieve this aspiration. We know here in Baltimore that there's a shortage of all of these things: good jobs, safe homes, especially for African American families. And while Maryland is often ranked as the wealthiest, 55% of Baltimore City residents are liquid asset poor. 55%, over half. That means that they don't have enough money in liquid savings that they could readily access to live at the poverty level for 3 months. We know that these numbers increase even more for households of color as well as for female-headed households. If you work at a job that doesn't offer direct deposit, of which many of our folks do, you're left to cash your check, to use money orders, to use bill payment services, or prepaid debit cards. Each carries their own set of fees. We're very concerned, actually, about these prepaid cards, both the fees, but also the procurement guidelines and the contracts as public agencies and employers move away from cutting checks. Just last year, here in Maryland, there was legislation by a county government that would have required use of a prepaid card or a bank account as a condition of their employment with the county. So, we think that if a prepaid card has the face or name of a celebrity on it, as we see a lot of them in Baltimore, consumers probably aren't getting the best deal. Despite unevenness in the market, there are some good actors. We're very pleased to see the CFPB weighing in on this market space, and we've also seen our local partner here, the Baltimore Cash Campaign. They've been offering a low-fee prepaid card for folks at tax time that don't have a bank account, and they really do fill a very important gap. For many residents here, tax time is a really positive moment, actually. It's the largest lump sum that they're going to get at one time, an infusion of cash the entire year. For those that receive the earned income tax credit, the average here in Baltimore City is just under $2,500. This lump sum is diminished by paid tax preparation, as well as refund settlement products. In fact, Baltimore City has 23% of all EITC filers in the entire state, but are overrepresented in the use of paid tax preparers, refund loans, and refund settlement products. The average cost of tax preparation is actually $268, but we often see fees upwards of $500. So not only are these costs expensive, but you also have no idea what you're getting when you choose a tax preparer. They could be unethical, they could be incompetent. Here in Maryland in 2008, we passed legislation to license paid tax preparers, which set a basic standard, but for a majority of the states across the country, they actually don't even have that basic protection. We need the IRS to have the full authority to license paid tax preparers. This is the most important financial document that taxpayers have each and every year. We often hear that financial education is the solution to all of these issues, and while there are fantastic programs here in Baltimore, we know that there's also a lot to learn about how to build and scale effective programs. And while personal responsibility is certainly important, people need access to affordable products in a transparent marketplace that has sufficient oversight. We understand that this is a balancing act, but right now, middle-class individuals and families are shouldering the heaviest burden. And these problems are complicated, but the solutions don't have to be. We need to flip our tax code right side up to help all families to save, invest, and build wealth. We need government oversight that protects consumers, but also allows businesses to profit. We need the private sector to provide us with innovation capital so we can test what works, and the public sector to help us to take that to scale. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and we look forward to working with you on solutions.
Thank you very much, Ms. McKinney. Ms. Richardson?
Thank you, Congressman Cummings, Congressman Sarbanes, and Senator Warren for the opportunity to be here today. While my comments will focus more on the conditions in Bel Air Edison, I think as a low to moderate income community with just about 18,000 residents, the majority of which are African American, really is a microcosm of Baltimore City. For context, you should know that our organization provides a number of revitalization services to the community. We do marketing and outreach, community organizing, homeownership counseling, and small business development. The one that I will focus on today, however, is homeownership counseling. We are a HUD-approved housing counseling agency, and as such, we provide a full menu of pre- and post-purchase counseling to hundreds of families each year. 82% of our clientele represent low to moderate income households, and of that number, 90% of our clientele are African American. When I first started working in Bel Air Edison about 12 years ago, there were 3 banks in our main commercial corridor. Today, there's only 1. As these banks have gone away, we have seen an increase in alternative banking companies, including, I'm clumping in there, the tax preparation firms. We have 1 full-time check cashing company and a local bar which provides check cashing services. These 2 establishments operate directly in our main street, but there are other check cashing services found in shopping centers just like Economy. Our message is to get your income taxes done by a reputable company, file electronically, and have access to all of your return without having to pay high percentage rates. It is a slow reward system, but to many people, getting immediate access to 80 or 85% of your return today is better than 100% of it in 2 to 3 weeks. People need money now. Many of our neighbors are dealing with so many financial hurdles: foreclosures, unemployment, underemployment, access to quality education for their children, transportation, the list goes on. While our organization Bella Edison is one. Mark Sisman and his team offer an array of low interest rate loan products to prospective buyers and existing neighbors, depending on the product, to either purchase a home in our community or renovate one. We have even partnered with Baltimore Cash Campaign to promote their free tax preparation services. One year, Sarah Johnson and her team set up shop right in the heart of our commercial district, and in that year, were able to prepare nearly 1,000 returns for our neighbors. Moreover, we partner with several banking institutions to find creative ways of educating our participants. One of our banking partners has helped us deliver a very creative program we call Find Women. It's a conference that we do every year for women to engage them and empower them around their finances. FIND stands for Financially Independent and Empowered. And we got to this place by looking at our numbers and seeing who's buying homes in our neighborhood. And predominantly female-headed households are doing just that. Monthly homebuyer workshops. We work with several banking partners to be speakers at these workshops on a rotating basis. And they provide information on the lending process when you're looking for a home, as well as our financial literacy workshops. As you can see, we believe in education, education, education. We are constantly getting the word out about our services, using every resource we have available to us: email, direct mail, banners, Facebook, Twitter, e-blast, community organizing, which in our opinion is our boots on the ground outreach. We constantly reevaluate ourselves and our community to ensure that we are providing resources and information that the community needs. Therefore, we develop new initiatives and create, and in some cases, expand our new partnerships to guarantee the success of our community. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Richardson. Ms. Ryder?
Thank you very much for including me in this forum today. What I'm most appreciative about it is that you're connecting the ideas of financial services access to the crucial problems that the middle class faces more generally. It can be really easy to view this as just an industry problem or a consumer challenge that isn't directly related to the core problems of people's lives, but it is. And part of why I come to that is through the research that I've been doing in partnership with NYU, the U.S. Financial Diaries Project. And through that project, we've had the opportunity to get to know over 200 families across the U.S. And we've gotten to try and track every single dollar they borrowed, spent, saved, or earned over the course of a year. So I'll tell the story of one of those families, Sam and Sarah Johnson. And they live in Ohio, and they cobbled together multiple forms of income. So Sam has a job as a salesman. He earns about $2,600 a month. Sarah has a job at a school where she earns consistently $1,100 a month. But that's not enough to fund their middle-class lifestyle. They own a home, they've got 2 cars, they're saving for retirement, and so they take on additional part-time work over the course of the year in order to make their lives function. And Sarah's going to school at the same time. So what does that mean? It means that their income is drastically lumpy. They, over the 6 months that I was looking at their data, there was one month where they earned $4,100 a month and another month where they earned $9,000 a month. That kind of volatility is impossible for somebody to manage purely through budgeting or careful monitoring of their spending. It's simply too big of a swing up and down. And what you see in larger national samples is that 4 out of 10 Americans have experienced a 25% swing up or down in their income over a 2-year period. That's extraordinary. And then what you see in our own research is that it's not only that these swings are year to year, these swings are month to month or day to day. And as a result, managing your financial life is a constant challenge. It's not that I can set a monthly budget and then stick to it. It's that every month is incredibly different. And in order to, and that makes it incredibly difficult to achieve financial health. Households have a lot of difficulty covering basic expenses, paying down debt, saving for the future, because they're busy managing near-term volatility. To bridge the gap, some households can tap into a savings account or shift spending to a credit card. But for millions of Americans who are liquid asset poor, which is 44% nationwide, or who don't have access to reliable credit, and 45 million households in this country have been defined as credit invisible, which means they don't have a credit score or they don't have enough information in their credit file to be scored. For those millions of people, easy solutions are scarce. And absent better options, many turn to costly financial products in order to manage uncertain financial lives. It's crucial that consumers be protected from predatory loan products and other dangerous financial services. And the challenges that you all have drawn attention to in terms of the lack of access to branch networks, the lack of easy access to a wide range of financial services, those are real problems. However, financial services are a crucial element of helping families to cope with the inevitable ups and downs of their lives. So it's not enough to limit the availability of bad products. That won't do it. We also need to replace them with better options. My organization, the Center for Financial Services Innovation, has created what we call the Compass Principles, which are standards for excellence in the design and delivery of financial services. We think that in order to meet these standards, providers must strive to help solve the real financial problems that people face. Consider, for example, these millions of Americans living with no financial cushion who experience so much volatility. In addition to a safe place to store funds or a way to pay bills, they need immediate liquidity, they need certainty, and they need control. And that's part of why they turn to alternative financial services. Payday loan borrowers have bank accounts by definition because the lender requires the borrower to provide a post-dated check as collateral. So this isn't an unbanked problem. However, often traditional checking accounts don't work that well if you can't maintain a minimum balance. If your account is fluctuating up and down around zero, for example. For those households, they need to know exactly how much they can spend real time, and checking accounts can offer a frustrating source of risk in the form of overdraft and bounce check fees. Checks take days to clear, whereas prepaid cards, money orders, and cash are immediate and more precise. With cash, you know exactly how much money you have to spend. So this isn't an argument to say we shouldn't be innovating and pushing more banks to serve these customers. It's simply a matter of saying not only do we need people geographically in the right place, we need them offering the products that people really need. And it can be very challenging to innovate in this marketplace, and we need new solutions in order to get there. One way to think about this is to think that the problem isn't only that people are underserved. Often the problem is that they are overserved. And we need to understand that the supply gap that exists isn't just an absence of products. It's an absence of products that are genuinely designed to build consumer financial health. Financial health comes about when an individual's daily systems help him or her to build resilience and pursue opportunities. Financial services that build financial health do more than just facilitate a specific transaction in exchange for a specific fee. They facilitate that transaction in a way that leaves the customer better off, whether that means greater stability or more freedom to pursue their dreams. For example, 3/4 of Americans do have a savings account, but more than half don't have a planned savings habit, and more than 1/4 have less than $1,000 in liquid savings. So there's a serious mismatch between what providers offer, which is a safe place to store funds, and what people really need, which is more support in building, using, and replenishing a buffer account over time. It will take significant innovation in the marketplace to align products with the true consumer need. But ultimately, we believe that finance can be a force for good in people's lives. Serving the needs of consumers responsibly has to be more profitable over the long term. Our vision is a financially healthy America where people's daily financial systems help them to build resilience and pursue opportunities. We look forward to working with all of you in order to advance that vision. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hurd, thank you very much, Mr. Snyder.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Congressman Cummings, Congressman Sarbanes, and Senator Warren for holding this session today and allowing me to represent Security Plus today. I'd like to focus on our small dollar loan program that we created to meet the needs of our members a few years ago. Back in 2011, we noticed an increasing number of our members having difficulties maintaining a positive balance in their checking accounts. Doing research, we determined that the issue was that some of these members were experiencing some type of financial stress. And it appears that they were turning to payday lenders to alleviate that stress. And when obtaining a loan, like you said, they basically have to give their checking account information to that payday lender, and in turn, they would attempt to debit that account in order to seek repayment for the loan, in many cases causing our members to have a negative balance. So, in response to that trend, we created a small dollar loan program to provide our members with the need of instant credit and with a more affordable measure and a more affordable and measured repayment option. We constructed the loan program to comply with the National Credit Union Administration's guidance on small dollar loans. And this program provides members with the opportunity to borrow up to $1,000 at a fixed rate of interest for a 6-month term. There are no prepayment penalties, and the loan must be paid in full in order to be eligible for another loan. And although the loan product may seem to be priced high to people with good credit, it's considerably more affordable to a person with limited or poor credit, and better than the typical lending opportunities that they have today. We tried to build our program to be simple and convenient, which are some of the major qualities that attract people to payday loans. To qualify for the loan, we require proof of employment. We verify that the member has the ability to repay the loan. We do not perform a credit check, but we do limit the number of loans that a member can obtain in a given period of time. We've seen the benefits of this program to our membership. I've been very grateful. Even though the default rate is high and the amount of time employees spend with this product is high also, because we require the member to interact with the staff before we issue the loan. Last year, all of our staff received at least an introductory training in financial counseling to assist our members in working to improve their credit so they can qualify for more favorable types of loans. Unfortunately, what we found is that many of our members prefer the convenience of the small dollar loan program over the traditional loan process, even if that process would provide a lower cost alternative. Security Plus also offers a credit builder loan product to help people either establish credit or improve their credit scores. Members are loaned money, which is locked away in a savings account. The members then make payments for the term of the loan. The interest rate is minimal. It's just set 3% above our savings dividend rate. After the loan is paid off, the proceeds are released to the members and they may do with it what they wish. Through consistent payment of the loan, the member's credit score should improve, allowing them to have access to more affordable credit. And one other note about Security Plus, we've just been recently designated as a low-income credit union, and we received our certification for a community development financial institution, which goes with our goal is to make a positive difference in the lives of our members, the staff, and the community. It is our belief that the education of the consumer, combined with the help of financial institutions, consumer advocacy groups, and social service organizations, can help our members, the people, and the community solve some of the financial problems they face today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I have the privilege of introducing our last witness for today. Matria Wilson is the Vice President of Government Affairs and Senior Counsel at the Center for Responsible Lending. CRL is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works to protect homeownership and family wealth by fighting predatory lending practices. The center is associated with Self-Help, which is a nonprofit community development lender. Ms. Wilson, who previously worked at the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, was named one of Housing Wire's 2014 Influential Women in Housing. Welcome, Ms. Wilson.
Thank you, Senator Warren, and good afternoon, Congressman Cummings and Congressman Sarbanes. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for launching the Middle Class Prosperity Project as a platform to engage the public in a much-needed conversation about the challenges facing middle-class America and all of those Americans who actually aspire to become a part of those ranks. The issues that are raised in today's forum are certainly timely. With 8 out of 10 households in the United States being created by people of color, the lack of economic opportunity and mainstream financial services in traditionally underserved communities, and especially communities of color, when combined with the costly and often predatory impact of allowing alternative financial services to fill that void, represents serious threats to the future of America's middle class and our nation's long-term prosperity. I applaud you for highlighting these issues today, and I thank you for allowing me to provide CRL's insights on the issue. So let's get to the facts. Multiple reports show that large disparities exist in the availability of mainstream financial services in traditionally underserved neighborhoods. And the years leading up to the financial crisis, financial institutions, traditional financial institutions, added more than 10,000 full-service banking branches. Yet the reality is that only 1 in 10 of those institutions were actually placed in minority and inner-city neighborhoods. The aftermath of the financial crisis has only made those matters worse. An analysis by Bloomberg showed that of the 1,800 banks that were actually closed, bank branches that were actually closed between 2008 and 2013, 93% of them were closed in underserved areas. During that same time period, affluent neighborhoods and predominantly white neighborhoods experienced an overall net increase in the number of bank branches that were opened in their area, meaning that they had more access, expanded access to traditional financial services. There is an urgent need in this country to address the absence of mainstream financial institutions in underserved communities. And the tragic events in Baltimore over the past few weeks only highlight the consequences of our failure to do so. West Baltimore residents made it clear to anyone who chose to listen that their rallies and protests went beyond the issue of police brutality and the death of Freddie Gray. 25-year-old resident Brendan Joyner-L, perhaps explained it best when he said, "This is happening because of years and years of socioeconomic disparity." Research supports Mr. Joyner-L's conclusion. A recently released study by economists at Harvard University found that low-income children growing up in Baltimore face slimmer chances for economic mobility than any other group of children growing up in the largest 100 counties in the United States. A report by Johns Hopkins University found that West Baltimore teenagers had a bleaker economic outlook than 15 to 19-year-olds living in economically distressed cities in Nigeria, India, China, and South Africa. The city of Baltimore has one of the largest wealth gaps in the United States, with Baltimore residents in the bottom fifth income profile typically earning $13,588, while those at the top 5% made an average of $166,924 in the same year. And in the heyday of predatory mortgage lending, the Justice Department found that the nation's largest mortgage lender targeted 4,500 homeowners in Baltimore and Washington, D.C. for discriminatory lending practices that involved intentionally giving people of color subprime mortgages, even though many of those borrowers qualified for a prime loan. Research by the Center for Responsible Lending showed that mortgage racial disparities existed even when controlling for credit scores of 660 and above. There are no bank branches in the zip code where the CVS convenience store and Ace Cash Express check cashing shop were recently looted in Baltimore. And mapping analysis by the National Community Reinvestment Coalition shows that a mere handful of locations exist in neighboring communities. This absence and continuing decline in numbers for traditional financial institutions located in underserved communities limits access to basic financial services for American citizens and forces them to pay steep fees for routine activities like cashing checks and paying their bills. The results are quite costly. In 1 year, the average underserved household spent approximately $2,412 just on interest and fees for alternative financial services. In contrast, monthly checking account fees at the nation's 10 largest banks averaged out at $8.76 per month, meaning individuals with access to mainstream institutions pay just $105 per year for many of the same financial services. 39% of banked individuals paid no monthly fees at all. I'm saying all of this because recently I had the privilege of testifying before the House Financial Services Committee about the regulation of non-depository financial institutions. And during my testimony, I heard a common and recurring theme. That is, many of the members of Congress who opposed regulating alternative financial services industries, opposed a strong CFPB payday lending rule, suggested to me that our position, CRL's position, was a position that limited the ability for underserved communities to exercise choice. To them and to you, I would say this one fact. Financial exploitation is rarely the byproduct of legitimate choice. Instead, it is recognized that payday lending is a predatory that needs substantial regulation. And in fact,
ways to help people manage the volatility that results.
You know, I found some documentation that picks up on a part of the point you're raising here about income volatility. The FDIC did a survey of households that had bank accounts and then ended up losing their bank accounts, dropping their bank accounts. And they found that 1 in 3 of the households that lost their bank accounts pointed to a job loss or other income loss as one of the reasons for becoming unbanked. So you've identified income volatility as a really serious problem. Part-time employment, lots of independent contractor work.
Right.
What other large-scale factors are pushing families into alternative banking? Ms. McKinney, do you want to add something here, or Ms. Richardson, anyone?
I know, I mean, specific here in Baltimore and in other parts of the state, you know, the good jobs, a lot of them have left the areas.
Yeah.
You know, they've gone to other places, and, you know, we hear when people come to get their taxes done, a lot of the reasons people come to us, right, is they have like 5 W-2s. Because, you know, and maybe throw a 1099 there too, because they're trying to patch it together, and they say, look, I'd love to get a job. I'd love to get a better job, but where? Where is there something within my transportation line? Where is there something within my skill set? And an exciting new opportunity here, you hear a lot about the mismatch, right, of the employers have jobs, but then they don't have someone to fill it. And here in Maryland, they started something called Earn Maryland, which is an employer-led skills training program. So say, okay, we have the folks, we have the jobs, let's get them trained up to participate in that. And so I think that helps to fill some of the gap, but in a lot of places, I look at our rural partners, they lose a manufacturing plant that loses 600 jobs. You can't just get that back.
You know, the jobs point really is key. When I was meeting with someone who's long-term citizen of Baltimore and was talking to me about the jobs that used to be there in the shipyards, the jobs in steel, the jobs that have all migrated overseas and just aren't here in Baltimore anymore, aren't in Philly, aren't in the United States, and have just been lost. That makes it tough for families. Any other thing you'd like to add to that, Ms.
yeah,
Wilson?
I mean, I think that it's important to consider the impact of jobs, but it's also important to remember that financial institutions simply aren't located in these communities. And that's a fact that we can't get around. You know, when you don't have a bank located in your neighborhood, you are more inclined to go use an alternative financial service provider because they're there. And when you look at the demographics of Baltimore and you look at mapping analysis, you find that, in fact, that's what's going on. Traditional financial institutions are not located in those neighborhoods, and as are
very few traditional banks in these communities, and yet there are plenty of payday lenders and check cashers, and there's someone figured out how to make a profit, indeed how to make substantial profits unfortunately, at the expense of the local residents, really pulling wealth out of these communities. But a reminder, there's work to be done in these communities and people who need services. So it's a very good point, Ms. Richardson. Anyone else wanted to add? Ms. Schneider?
Yes, I thought of another point I wanted to make sure to make here, which is that the it would be a mistake to talk about this only in terms of people's income. It's also the case that on the expense side, people have so much more personal responsibility and personal risk than they ever had before. Right? So with the loss of your salaried job that has a steady paycheck is also the loss of health benefits and easy retirement saving structures. And so what you see is that people have so much more responsibility for their and so much more volatility in their expense side as well as their income side. And I do think that makes them harder customers to serve. And it makes it easier for them to be served in a transactional way. And banks are relying on steadiness. Now, I'm not saying that as an excuse. I'm saying it as an explanation for as we convince traditional financial institutions to serve this customer, we can't assume that the checking account is necessarily going to do it. Because what you see is that people do have such ups and downs in both their need for spending and their cash coming in, that they need to be able to have ways to smooth that out. And the checking account doesn't provide a way to smooth that out, and we haven't seen credit cards necessarily being the best solution either.
Senator Warren, can I chime in? Because I think one of the benefits of the Center for Responsible Lending is that we're not just a policy and research organization, but we're also an affiliate of Self-Help, which is a credit union. And it's a credit union that for the past 30 years has actually made a conscious effort to actually serve traditionally underserved communities. And one of the things we say to institutions who say, gee, it's just difficult to serve single women families, low and moderate income communities, those sorts of things, is that we've somehow managed to do it successfully and profitably for the past 30 years. And we don't do it just because we want to feel good. We do it because we generate a meaningful profit. There is a business model that can continuously succeed, even in providing short-term, small-dollar lending products to underserved communities without charging 390% interest. And that's just a fact.
And I take it Mr. Hurd would agree with that.
I agree.
Good. You are right about this, about the changing business model, what we need. I think a lot, though, about people who are being permanently locked out of the system. Just last week, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau released a report documenting that 1 in every 10 adults in the United States has no credit history with a nationwide consumer reporting agency of any kind. The industry calls them credit invisibles. In addition, we have many other Americans who've watched their credit scores drop in the fallout after 2008 when people were laid off. Just 2 weeks ago, the congressman and I heard from college graduates who are just starting out and their credit scores are already destroyed because of the huge amount of student loan debt that they've had to take on. I worry about people who are being locked out of the system economically and then, as you rightly point out, end up paying more and more and more just to manage day-to-day living, never catching up and certainly never getting ahead. So thank you very much for your testimony on this. Congressman?
Thank you very much. Ms. Wilson, I want to go back to the Consumer Protection Bureau. You had mentioned that they have promulgating a rule. Can you talk about that for a minute? What do you expect will come of it? I mean, do you think it'll be beneficial?
Well, thank you, Congressman Cummings. We are certainly supportive of actually establishing a federal rule surrounding payday lending. It's an idea whose time has long since come, and so we welcome the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's interest in this area. One caveat that we would say to that is that it is important to the Center for Responsible Lending that the ability to repay standard by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau be uniform. Currently in the SBREFA proposals that we see from the CFPB, there are certain situations where the agency or bureau is considering allowing exceptions to that standard. We find that to be fundamentally problematic. It shouldn't be controversial for institutions to say, gee, before I give you a loan, I should at least make sure that I think you have an ability to repay it. That seems like a minor step in analysis, a step in analysis that's not only beneficial to the consumer, but also beneficial to the safety and soundness of the institution itself.
You know, Senator Warren, in her previous life, spent a lot of time putting the Bureau together, and we were fought big time. Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. And I remember that during our hearings, and we had many, we had some folks on the other side of the aisle, and out of all the hearings that we had, I never heard not a sentence about being concerned about our constituents, the consumers. Mm-hmm. And there are some that would say that we need to do away with regulations. And what business does the federal government have in getting involved in this? What would your response be to that? And then I'm going to come to you. Somebody, you can answer that, but I want you to be prepared, Ms. Richardson, for a question while Ms. Wilson answers the question I just asked. I just want to give you some warning, that's all. But I noticed, you know, I guess as a lawyer, I just watch witnesses, and I noticed that you seemed like you got a little down when you heard Ms. Wilson talk about how people who were qualified in Baltimore and other places for prime loans were given subprime. I mean, your head just dropped, and as if you had a lot of, you know, you had dealt with that a lot. So I just want you so now we'll come back to you, Ms. Wilson.
Right. I mean, Congressman Cummings, I think you're spot on. And as I said before, my experience in the most recent conversations is that individuals who oppose regulation suggest that it's a matter of choice. And again, I would reiterate, financial exploitation is rarely a matter of choice. People don't make decisions. I mean, just ask yourself this basic question. If you knew that you could qualify for a 23% interest loan, why would you ever take out a 290% interest loan, right? I mean, what rational person in this room says, yes, I want the more expensive loan, give that to me. And so you automatically begin to see the fallacy of this type of reasoning. The reality is that most of these sorts of decisions are being made around more insidious areas, more insidious considerations, discrimination being a significant one. And if we're going to be honest in this conversation, we have to choose to acknowledge that. When we look at predatory lending in the mortgage area, we see that the result of steering was specifically targeted to single women, people of color, rural Americans, working class individuals, because institutions thought that they could get away with it. And if we ask ourselves, why don't we need regulation, the reality is that we as a nation have decided that that type of discrimination is contrary to the principles of what we believe in. We have that enshrined in our law. And so we need regulation so that we can adhere to the moral standards that exist in not only our laws, but our Constitution.
Ms. Richardson?
Yes. My reaction to her statement was, it put me back at around 2008 when our counselors were meeting with people who were about to lose their homes. And we remember looking at their loan documents and seeing, you know, just seeing kind of the abuse within the documents that we reviewed. And so I remember this one family was paying this really low mortgage note, and then when they came to us, they were like, my mortgage jumped from $250 to like over $1,000, and not knowing the whole while that they had an interest-only loan. And so it just reminded me of just that moment in our time when our counselors were bringing in family after family, and they were honestly not knowing what had happened to them. And so that was my reaction to that. It's just like, you reminded me of that moment, yeah.
You know, as Senator Warren was talking about, when we heard in two previous hearings, one in Boston and one at Howard University, where students and parents came and talked about student loans. And it's some of the most painful testimony I've ever heard. Because these were people who were doing okay. They were doing pretty good. And then they got on a merry-go-round that they could not get off. And it was debt, money, just putting money out, money. And I think some kind of way, I was just thinking how often the victim is blamed. Right. Would you agree, Ms. McKinney? They say, they should have done it, they should have looked, they should have been more careful, and really, but they don't say to those folks who are getting all the money, they don't say that, punish them, but Ms. McKinney?
No, they don't. And one thing that we see a lot of are people that end up with student loan debt from for-profit schools, places that they go to, that they walk out without a credential, sometimes without have taken a class, but with a student loan debt. And so for those folks, again, they're sort of coming from even deeper in the hole and trying to rise up. And as much as we've tried to do around that, we need a lot more help. We need a lot more muscle to work with them. This morning I came from, we have a Financial Education Capability Commission here in the state of Maryland that we actually staff. That's how you save money at the state level, is you have a nonprofit staff, a legislative commission. And that's how we cut the budget. And we've been talking about student loan debt for the last 2 years. The average in the state of Maryland is about $25,000. And today we were looking at about 30 recommendations that we've had over the last 2 years and trying to figure out what to do. And we found with each recommendation around, well, how can we get more people to fill out the FAFSA? We know so many people that don't even fill it out. Well, then you have all these scholarships and institutional aid and how this process is so complicated. And I think for a lot of our families, we're trying to teach them how to follow the money, but the people that are trying to get their money are following theirs.
Wow. Mr. Hurd, just to be my last question. You talked about these loans of $1,000. Is it up to $1,000? Or?
I'm sorry.
Is it up to $1,000?
It comes in two denominations, a $500 loan or a $1,000 loan.
Tell me how you guarantee payment.
We do not guarantee payment. We do not require automatic payment on that. We talk to the members, we try to counsel them, and we believe in that, that will get us our payments back. Now, the losses are higher than our normal loans, but it has worked for the vast majority of cases.
Okay, what's your default rate? I'm just curious.
It's about 8%.
Okay, all right.
Yes, 8%, compared to about 2% on our normal unsecured loans.
And Ms. Schneider and Ms. Wilson, what would you want us to do? And then we'll go to Mr. Sarbanes. What can we do? What would you, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you have us do as members of Congress?
So think big. Fundamentally, I think we need a mind shift in what we expect from our financial services industry. I think that we need to acknowledge that this is a heavily regulated industry with plenty of federal benefits, right? The lower cost of access to deposits, lower cost of capital due to access to deposits, a special relationship with the federal government. And in exchange for that, we should aim really high in terms of what we expect from our financial services companies. And I think we need to have a real shift so that financial services companies perceive themselves not just as deliverers of a service, but as invested in the financial health of their customers. We need to start thinking about the objective here as not just facilitating financial transactions, but enabling people to be better off over time. And I think the role that Congress can play is enormous in terms of setting the national stage and setting the agenda for what matters for people. The work that the Bureau is doing is phenomenal. And having fought that fight tooth and nail to get the Bureau set up was incredibly important. And the Bureau needs to stay and continue to be strong. I also think that as we think about the national conversation around mobility, around income inequality, we need to remember the role that financial services play in those core American ideals, and it's huge. You hear about the student loans or mortgages. These are financial services that facilitate the basic building blocks of opportunity in our country. So we need to make sure that we stay focused on how important they are.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes, sir.
So I have three things in my mind that I think Congress can do. The first and foremost is actually to defend the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, because it is under attack right now in Congress from certain members.
Well, I just want you to know you're talking to the choir up here.
I know I am, but I have to say
and we
it
sing in
because
tune.
because it deserves to be repeated at every opportunity. There are significant efforts underway to roll back the protections that were accomplished by that law. They are essential if we're to move forward and have a fair financial system for all consumers. And so we can't afford to cede ground in that respect. The second thing I want to say is actually something that people don't always talk about as much, but we certainly need to start talking about. And that is the fact that in 1974, a law was passed called the Community Reinvestment Act. And it was designed to actually hold financial institutions accountable for meeting the needs of their communities. That law has not been updated since 1974. And yet we all know that financial institutions and the nature of financial banking, the nature in which we actually engage financial services has changed significantly in this country. Our failure to update that law and make it responsive to the realities of modern day banking is a large contributor to why we don't have financial institutions being held accountable. In addition, that law has no meaningful enforcement mechanism outside of the merger or acquisition process, which in many cases it makes it ineffective. And lastly, the thing that I want to encourage you to do is do exactly what you're doing right now. And that is that far too often the debate in Washington, D.C. is removed from a meaningful and honest conversation about the real challenges facing middle-class Americans and those Americans who aspire to be middle class in this country. We need to have honest, candid, and at sometimes uncomfortable conversations about what's really going on in our communities and impeding people from being able to access opportunities.
Thank you very much. Congressman Sarbanes.
Thank you, Congressman Cummings. Thanks to the panel. This has been terrific, although sobering, certainly. So I'm glad, Ms. Wilson, you mentioned the Community Investment Act, because I was going to ask the panel about that. I think you've covered the reasons why it's important to take a look at that again. I fear that one of the reasons it has not been upgraded over nearly 4 decades is because wealthy influences and special interests wield way too much power in Washington because they put a lot of money into lobbying and a lot of money into campaigns and so forth. So whenever you get up a little bit of momentum to try to revise those kinds of regulations, you run into that wall. But we have to overcome it for the benefit of these Americans that are being left behind. Congressman Cummings talked about sort of punishing the victim, that attitude. And I also feel like sometimes we lecture about how people need to work hard and play by the rules. This is all about people work hard, play by the rules, save a little bit of money, and then the system comes crashing down on them. So it's an absolute reneging on the grand bargain, which is supposed to be what the American dream is all about. It's shameful. And we ought to do the kind of soul searching that these sorts of gatherings are designed to try to help with. In terms of the CFPB, I too want to thank Elizabeth Warren for her incredible work there. It's really her legacy. And we did fight tooth and nail to build that, and now we're fighting tooth and nail to stop it from being torn down. Just about every week, certainly in the House of Representatives, there's a bill that comes to the floor, and it's passing because of who the majority is there, with very innocent sounding names like America is Great and Freedom is Wonderful Act of 2015. But if you look behind it, it's just another way of trying to undo the authority of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And so we have to really try as much as we can to hold the line. I wanted to ask a question about, I understand, Mr. Hurd, how you're finding some space to create a product for folks out there who need money quickly. It's still a pretty high interest rate, but it's all relative. I understand there's a fair amount of certainty that that refund's coming, right? So does that reduce the risk that a traditional financial institution might have, kind of getting into that space and offering some loans against the refunds? Does that kind of thing happening anywhere?
Not that I'm aware of for traditional financial institutions, and you're right, I believe there would be a fair amount of certainty as long as the tax return was done correctly. That would be the major thing if you're relying on a third party to do the tax return and you generate a loan based off that tax return, I think you would need some type of input or guarantee to make sure the return is done correctly. If that's the case, then that will lower the risk.
Well, maybe that we can explore what could be done from the side of the institution, in this case, the one providing the refund, to maybe give some assurances that would allow a product to be delivered at a more reasonable interest rate by a traditional banking or financial institution.
And that would be a great opportunity for partnership. That's one of the things we look for in the community, is to look to partner with that. We also partner with different credit union service organizations that have various expertise. So that is something we'd be more than willing to explore.
And then I just wanted, for anyone on the panel who wants to respond to this, my sense is, we often talk about when there's a recession, that in a recession, certain people get left behind. And I think that's intuitively obvious to most folks. But we now have this new phenomenon. It's, I think, fairly new, but widespread, that we actually have recoveries that are leaving people behind. So that's an interesting concept, but that's happening now in America, right? There is a recovery going on, but it's uneven. It's very uneven. And communities that are disempowered, in fact, are becoming more disempowered in the recovery. And I wonder if you'd speak to whether what you're seeing is that, banking institutions, traditional institutions, and I understand why they would be motivated to do this, in the recovery are chasing the wealth and the money to where it goes. And they're getting even increasingly more distracted from, quote, doing the right thing or trying to provide financial products in places where maybe the return isn't huge, but it's still profitable, because they're going where the recovery is taking them. So everyone's getting distracted and kind of chasing the shiny object of the recovery and where that wealth is being consolidated. And the result of that is then pulling up stakes even more from the places where the recovery is not as strong. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling thing. So can you speak to that phenomenon, which I think is maybe happening right now, and to the extent you're seeing that kind of thing? And we can start over here with Ms. McKinney.
We're definitely seeing that. And just quickly on the other point, there is something that the IRS can do. It's called the debt indicator. And it was a big issue when we were trying to get some of the federal regulators to weigh in around refund anticipation loans and refund anticipation checks. The IRS was giving them access to a debt indicator, which would let them know if the refund was going to be held for any reason. So there is actually a tool in place to look at doing that in a positive way. Right. What we've seen, I'd say, is there has been such really great innovative product ideas that have come out. Prize-linked savings is one, where you can save some and win a chance to get a prize, that we've just seen a real hesitancy to try something that's new, that's different, looking at mobile, looking at prepaid that has a savings pocket, all of these sort of innovative things that would really help our market people aren't interested. And in a lot of ways, the excuse that we've heard is there's just so much regulation right now. It's not a predictable marketplace, so we can't do it now. Even when we bring, whatever technical assistance costs, I've brought private foundation money to some of these things, and we just can't always get the traction. And I think that's where we actually often need you and need your voice to be the convener, because it's really easy for people to blow me off, though people that know me might not agree with that. But we need you. We need you and your accountability and your voice in these conversations to say, this is important, you need to be doing this, and helping us to get at those tables.
Anybody else on this issue?
I would say there's no doubt that the recovery has been lopsided, and there are very simple explanations for that, and one of which is simply this. When you look at the rebounding of the United States economy, you see that most of that rebound has taken place on Wall Street and in the stock market. But for the majority of Americans, particularly those who fall below the top 20% in terms of wealth earning profiles, 66% of their wealth actually comes from the equity that they have in their homes. And the reality is that the housing market has not recovered. And as a result of that, most middle-class Americans or working-class Americans or Americans who aspire to be part of those classes have not been able to regain their economic stronghold. One of the big issues that the United States has to face going forward, if we're going to have a strong economy, is how we deal with making the housing market stable and accessible again to working-class Americans.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I do think with the trend, we do see trends in cycles, in recoveries. And if you're right, people that chase the recovery, there's a lot of competition for that amongst lenders. As the margins get thinner and thinner, for a person with an 800 credit score who wants a car loan, they can pretty much call their shots. They can get a rate as low as 1.49%. That's very tough for financial institutions to make any type of money on loans like that. So once that happens, I think you will see people start to come back to the lower credit scores. It's just a matter of doing it responsibly and making sure that everybody has access. But as that comes, it will take a while, but it will eventually come back because it is very tough for financial institutions to make money on very thin margins.
So I'll chime in as well. There's no doubt the recovery has been uneven, and that creates, probably both as a result of that and just separately, there's unevenness in how financial services are being delivered. I think we've all talked about ways in which that's the case.
This is not new in the United States. The reality is that it existed in 1911 and continued for decades before it was eliminated. So there certainly is a precedent for using postal offices to actually provide financial services in communities.
All right, good. So let me ask you, Ms. McKinney, what kinds of products do you think the Postal Service might be able to offer to families that would help them work here in Baltimore and in other places around the country?
Well, I think they're to anything that helps with their basic transactions. So here we've seen some really good success. Unfortunately, it's closed now, but it was a partnership of a credit union and a check casher, where they could both be in the same place. They did free money orders, they did bill payment services for different utilities, but they could basically pull the best of both worlds of what the bill payment services were good for, what the credit union could do, because in that kiosk model, they couldn't use cash. I think to help people to manage their day-to-day, but giving them a path to a bank account, a path back to the mainstream services is really important. This moment of tax time is so critical. And it's so much money coming back. And we have this great network of volunteer income tax assistance sites here in Baltimore. There's about 50 across the state, 3 million returns across the country. We're always looking for space and a credible partner. I think having a free tax preparation site, already an IRS government program, would be a great service to offer. To start, the challenge, I think, is, we hear about a lot of folks that might have the option to get a bank account and don't. They had one, they had a bad experience, there was trust, there was fees, or people just not feeling welcomed. I think the challenge that we have to be honest about with the federal government offering it is the federal government isn't always known for being warm and fuzzy. Yeah. Right? And so I think that we have to think about how do you set up that customer service angle of somebody coming in to let them know that they're there for them and there for the community.
Yeah. So, but it's a very interesting point you make about the post office, where the post office can be a trusted partner, but also the post office potentially partnering up with a local credit union, a local community bank, with the credit union, the community bank, doing both the the behind-the-scenes services, kind of setting up the core pieces that they're doing, but also serving as the place where over time, as a family gets more into mainstream banking, being able to migrate them to checking accounts that are somewhere else. So you may start with just bill-paying services at the post office, maybe even small dollar loans at the post office, very confined number of products, and then expand beyond that. Anything else we should be thinking about here on that? Does that kind of get the main ones, Ms. Richardson?
The only thing I would say is, as you were describing that, Robin, and I was thinking of our post office in Bel Air Edison, it would also be great if, even if it's just at a referral level, connecting these folks with HUD-approved housing counseling agencies. Not even if they're not looking for a home, but these folks, our counselors, are certified and can talk about budgeting and savings, and it doesn't cost anything.
No.
And so I would say that would be the point that I would want to make that connection.
So
as
we already
well.
have this investment in the building. We have employees there. We're paying for the heat and the air conditioning and, the insurance, all the things we need, the parking lot. And the idea of maybe partnering up so that we get better financial services year-round, better financial services at tax time, better services just to let people know what's available to them, so that maybe down the line they can think about buying a home, having access to other services. It's very creative. Very creative in a world where the FDIC did a survey on banks' efforts to serve the unbanked and underbanked back in 2011. They found that fewer than half of all the banks surveyed, 43%, were actively involved in developing products and services for underserved consumers. In other words, it's not like that everyone's out there trying to figure out how to do this and what kinds of services might help, which takes us to the question of the Community Reinvestment Act. So, Ms. Wilson, how could the Community Reinvestment Act be used to encourage traditional banks to do more to expand access to the unbanked and underbanked?
One of the most immediate things that comes to mind is that right now, the Community Reinvestment Act has a very outdated mechanism for actually determining when financial institutions have an obligation to serve a particular community. So take Baltimore. I think the largest 5 institutions are many of the largest banks in the United States, yet not one of them actually has a Community Reinvestment Act examination assessment area located in Baltimore, even though they are the largest providers and holders of deposits for Baltimore residents. So what that translates to is that the banks that actually take the money from Baltimore residents have no federal obligation to actually invest in those communities, and not one federal financial regulator is actually examining whether or not they're making investments in those communities. And I think that's a really profound point because, again, when we watch these protests and rallies, we heard people saying, look, we can't get jobs. What about recreation centers and all those sorts of things? But we all know that financing is local, particularly when it comes to businesses. And so the ability to do commercial development, the ability to create loans for businesses and create jobs depends upon having financial institutions who understand the community.
That's very powerful, Ms. Wilson. Anyone wanted to add to that?
I would
Ms.
just
McKinney?
say, we do have some bright spots here. We have some really great CRA officers here in Baltimore that, are at the community meetings, that are active members of the coalitions. Where we see them getting stuck is when they have to take things up the food chain, right? They're standing with us and trying to figure it out, but when they have to take a product idea back or, get engaged on the marketing side, they get stuck. And so I think there's also some real challenges of how the CRA person is seen within the larger financial institution and how invested the institution really is.
Whether or not it really is a priority to make this work. Good. Well, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. Congressman?
Well, I'll just pick up on, I want to keep going on the CRA because it sounds like a pretty concrete and specific thing that could be strengthened to address some of these issues. So what's getting it stuck? Can you be a little more specific about where you think the problem is in terms of maybe enforcement or expectation around standards and services under the currently articulated CRA, and then maybe speak to what you think is standing in the way of coming back in and trying to make the standards a little bit more relevant for the communities that are that are facing these challenges?
Well, I think at the smaller level, when people like us and when our partners are trying to figure out how to finance free tax preparation and financial education and financial coaching, sometimes we hear, oh yeah, that's CRA eligible and there's a path to do that. And for other places, there aren't. And so there's just not always a consistent message for financial institutions to know how, because we don't work on the lending side. And so what we hear, that they have a lot more clarity on the lending side. And so that makes it hard sometimes when we're trying to negotiate that. There isn't a lot of clarity there. I think the other challenge that we see is that for these institutions, there isn't a sort of stock budget, right, in terms of a percent for whatever they're working on. And so we often see their sort of public contribution dollars just going to one specific thing because that's the only thing that the institution wants to invest in, just small business lending or just this one part. And so then all of these other services and interests, whether it's about second chance checking accounts or these prize link savings accounts or financial education, there's just sort of no room or space because in order to meet their requirement, they're just sort of checking one box. So that's one sort of challenge we see in sort of on the ground.
Ms. Wilson, you have some theories?
I would just say that there's a statutory language barrier, and that's one of the reasons why the Community Reinvestment Act needs to be updated. The ability for financial regulators to actually examine those institutions and hold them accountable, and by statute, is actually limited to their brick and mortar branch presence in a particular area. And yet the nature of banking is simply this. I can lift up this cell phone right now, I can take a picture of a check and I can deposit it. I can go to an ATM and I can insert my check and I can deposit it. And that some of those financial activities that are taking place, even though I live in a particular area, mean that the institution has no obligation to serve me because it's not a brick and mortar presence. And so there is a need for Congress to step in and update that language to reflect the realities of modern day banking.
When was the last time we took a meaningful stab at that updating as a Congress?
Well, again, I will say the law has never been updated since 1974. I believe that there was a push in the 1990s to at least consider updating the Community Reinvestment Act, but it did not go very far. And so we have not, aside from a member of Congress here and there introducing legislation to try and update it, it's not been a serious consideration for a number of years. And I think part of the reason for that is exactly what you said, Congressman Sarbanes. I think there are very powerful interests who oppose being held accountable for the money that they take from certain communities and having the obligation to invest it back in those communities.
Thank you.
Ms. McKinney, you said something that was more powerful than you think. You said you told us that you all need us. We need you. We need all of you. We really do. As I sat here and I listened to your testimony, I was reminded of the fact that it's the people like you who are on the ground, who care about people and have a passion and expertise, and you who feel the pain of other people and then are willing to speak it. But not only to speak it, but to also come up with meaningful solutions. We need you desperately. As I lose my voice. I want to go back to something that you talked about for a minute because it really concerned me. You talked about the lady who had 8 loans and 7 of them were illegal. Let me tell you what bothers me about that. I worry about the people who didn't have a McKinney. You know, the one who's probably lost everything she's got. Maybe living with a brother-in-law and sister in a cramped house now, barely able to survive. How do we get in front of that? You follow what I'm saying? You had to come after the fact for something that was illegal. Can you help me with that?
So one thing, well, one of many things that we've tried. So we do a lot of practitioner training and sort of outreach. We train about 500 to 1,000 practitioners each year that are just out there in the human service workforce. So this particular client actually came to us through an employee assistance program at that hospital, where we went in and talked to them about, you know, what services are available through a network. And I always talk to people about payday loans, because I think a lot of times people hear that headline, well, it's illegal here, because nothing illegal ever happens, apparently, once you've passed a law. And so we remind people of it all the time. And we just had a training this week, or this past week, and someone reached out to us and said, you know, I just had that happen. That happened to me. That happened to someone else I know. And so it's on us. I mean, we get it out through, you know, the foster care system, through, you know, Department of Social Services, but there's only one Robin McKinney here. I have a staff of 4, and we do everything we can to get the word out, but we need that like oomph, right, of state and federal government who are reaching out to people to say, hey, here are your rights, here's what's possible. I mean, it happened to be, too, that I happen to know people in the Commissioner of Financial Regulations office, right? I didn't have to normally have her file a complaint, walk her through that process. I picked up the phone, I said, this looks crazy. Can you confirm it's crazy? And what do I need to do right now to stop the bleeding? But not everyone has that access, and we need to be in front of our faith-based groups. We need to be at the libraries. I mean, we try to push it out as much as possible, but I think we need to be louder.
The, you know, here in Maryland, our state legislature has led the way in imposing caps on the interest rates for consumer lending, 33% for the first $1,000 of a loan that totals $2,000 or less, and 24% for the next $1,000 for loans under $6,000. In fact, the Corporation for Enterprise Development in its 2015 Assets and Opportunity Scorecard has ranked Maryland, quote, #1 among all states for its adoption of policies aimed at helping struggling residents. And yet, we know that significant challenges remain in ensuring financial security of Maryland families and preventing predatory practices in the financial services market. Mr. McKinney, after Maryland imposed interest rate caps on consumer lending, did storefront payday lenders close and leave?
We did see, I would say, a big shift in, especially the big ones, you know, sort of the national franchises. They definitely, we saw less of that. But now, I mean, the challenge is the internet. Even right now, you could go on your phone right now and Google Maryland and payday loan, and you're going to get a ton of options that come up. And they're lead generators, right? Those aren't all lenders. One of the loans of these 8 loans that Ms. Thompson had, when she, you know, put it into the one website, she got an email back. She wanted to open it so that she could read the terms. I wish everyone did, right? I know they don't, but she opened it to read it, and they considered that consent. By her opening the email, that was considered consent. And so with the internet, as well as I think what we've seen with tribes, so, you know, that's been a huge issue of people trying to, you know, fall under a sovereign law. And we've seen a big challenge with that here in Maryland too, is in the age of the internet, you know, our Commissioner of Financial Regulations office, they just can't keep up with cease and desist letters to, you know, that it just spirals out all of these tentacles. And again, because they're lead generators, they turn the website off, start a new one up, and keep going.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up, but I just, as I close, I just want to thank all of you for being here. Give them a hand, please.
Congressman, the only thing I'll add to this is I want to say thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for being here today. We talked about a lot of problems, about the problems of access, about the problems of products that don't work for people given their lives, about the predatory lenders. But I want to remind everybody, loud and clear, this is not inevitable. None of this had to happen. It's because of policy decisions made at the state and federal government level. Policy decisions to deregulate financial institutions, to turn them loose, to do whatever they wanted to do to make profits, to sell lousy products, products they knew were going to cost people their homes, products they knew were going to get people tangled in loans that they would never be able to pay off. It's because of policy decisions made in Congress, made in the state level, and that is both the bad news and the good news, because it means we can make changes. I find some optimism here today. Part of the optimism is speaking out. Maybe this is just the consequence of having worked in this field for such a very long time. But for a long, long, long time, no one talked about this. This was not mainstream. This was something that just happened. And exactly as you said, Congressman, it was the fault of the people who signed on to those terrible mortgages, who signed on to those terrible payday loans, who signed up for those title loans. Now we're having a more open conversation about it, and we're talking about creative ways to respond. Mr. Hurd, I'm delighted to hear about your small dollar lending program. I know that an 8% default rate is higher than you want, but that's pretty darn good. And it helps families not only get over a really bad rough patch, but you're helping them build credit. You're helping them build a stronger financial future. That's creativity that's working. We talked about postal banking and the opportunities for the post office to partner up with others to create new products, to give more access, to be a trusted partner to families, to communities, to neighborhoods. So, and we talked about change for the community, for CRL, and how important that is. So I just want to say, you know, change starts with good ideas and a willingness to fight for them. So I think we got some great partners here, Congressman. Good ideas, we're ready to fight. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. As we close, let me just say this, that one question that we have gotten in every single forum, and that is why you do this.
Yeah. This is why.
We have heard this over and over again. Almost every single reporter said, why be bothered? And what we say is that, why not? You gotta fight, we have to fight back. We have no choice, or you get run over. And we can make a difference. And sometimes, you know, you have to change what normal is. You have to change, you have to dare to believe that you can have a new normal. And that's what we're trying to do. And we already see some impact. I mean, people are, like Senator Warren said, the discussion is slowly changing, but it's changing. And and every time I see her, I can't help but think about the attacks that she got when she was trying to form the Consumer Protection Bureau. And I mean, it was vicious with a capital V. But she kept pressing on. Just kept pressing. And sometimes I ask myself, I would ask myself, is it going to make a difference? And it's already making a difference. We were told that, for example, that the protection bill would just be out of control, the world would end if it got, if they were doing what they were supposed to do. And I mean, we had all kinds of scare tactics, but yet and still it prevailed, and it's doing a great job and helping a lot of people. And we have to look at our victories and be inspired by those aspirations and what we've accomplished. And I noticed that when I look around the room, there's so many people here. My friends from the Maryland bankers want to thank you for being here. For all of the advocates who are out there, who every day go out there making a difference in people's lives. And I want to thank all of you, because you realize it's bigger than you. And you're trying to make things better, not only just for your family, but for generations yet unborn and so many others. May God bless you, and thank you very much.